You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. It's 7:44 p.m. Pacific time. And today what I thought I would talk about is this perception that some of us have that we only attract the wrong person, or we're only interested in the emotionally unavailable uh, person another way to put it is we get into these patterns of relationship where over and over again we have the same relationship that is unfulfilling and is in some sense recognizable. One thing you might call it is the glow. I like to call it the glow. You walk into a room, you scan all of the people who are there, and then some people light up like Christmas trees, and other people recede into the background. As it turns out, uh, the evolutionarists think that we have this mechanism where the unconscious body-mind process is able to recognize other people's unconscious body-mind processes, and we're able to identify somebody who is likely to provide for us the care that we received in our family systems. Now, why would this be a good idea? Some of us might be asking, since we over and over again identified the creeps in the room. But the idea is that if you can recognize the care that you received and you got good care, you recognize the people that are likely to provide good care. It's like a shorthand. But if you didn't have good care, you're just recognizing the care that you did have over and over again, pursuing that. Once you begin to recognize the kind of patterning that you have um, and the kind of relationship that they tend to produce, what you begin to see is that really you're engaging in these recognitions of conflict resolution strategies and trying to match up with the way that your family system operated so you know what to do in the relationship. When we come to places like this where we want to examine that and maybe change that and move from, say, an insecure transactional relationship or a disorganized, trauma bonded relationship into secure functioning, what we need to begin to do is learn the dynamics of secure functioning relationships so that we can begin to enact them. One of the things about this approach that's useful is you don't have to do a deep dive and uproot your native attachment conditioning in order to change the dynamics of relationships that you have. And also, as you learn these strategies, you can begin to renegotiate the relationships that you have in an attempt to move them to more secure functioning. One way you might describe that would be that you agree to take care of somebody in the way that they need to be taken care of, and they agree to take care of you in the way that you need to be taken care of. This is one of the things that doesn't really happen so much in insecure and disorganized relationships, although it's quite ordinary in secure functioning relationships. And then when you look at the distribution of relational patterns and how they tend to link up with uh, other specific um, attachment patterns, you can begin to recognize those dynamics. For instance, secure people tend to go with secure people because they have all of the skills that a secure person would want, but none of the other groups really have the full set of skills, and so there's less interest in people that don't have them. Dismissing people most commonly go with preoccupied people in the organized part. Uh, Dismissing people don't really reciprocate care, but preoccupied people are willing to trade physical proximity for care. And so they take on the care of the relationship in exchange for proximity. Whereas secure functioning relationships, it tends to be a collaborative agreement where each party takes on the whole care of the other person. In insecure relationships, it tends to be more transactional. I do this for you, and you do that for me. But it's not the whole care, it's individual expressions of care. And then disorganized people tend to go with other disorganized people. It can be paired with a fearfully preoccupied or fearful avoidant, um, or complexly disorganized. Those relationships tend to be quite volatile and often reenacting of the different trauma experiences that each party has. So unstable and volatile and quite changeable, not reliable. But we can, without being able to mentalize these qualities in ourselves, think that we're actually targeted by people that are unreliable, or we don't recognize in other people what actually is happening. And this is something that happens pretty early, um, and it's really an empathetic response, or at least how I like to think about it. When we talk about empathy, what we're talking about is the capacity or the visceral response to the witnessing of physical or emotional pain in someone else. The second one is where we're able to identify facial expressions and body language and understand that that's reflective of the internal state of the other person. The third level is where we have what we call compassionate empathy in Buddhism, where you feel in your body a facsimile of what the other person is feeling. And mainly for secure people and not for insecure, disorganized people, you have the fourth aspect, which is the comparison of what somebody says they're going to do with what they do, and what they say they're not going to do with what they don't do. Now you might ask, why would that be a component of empathy, that comparing what people say and what they do? And the reason for that is one of the main purposes of the empathetic experience is to be able to identify whether somebody is telling you the truth or not. What we tend to do is take the external presentation of someone else, which we recognize in the second level of empathy, their facial expressions and body language, and compare it to the third level, which is the felt sense of them. And then if you're a secure person, of course, you compare the felt sense to them matching with the external presentation of them, and whether they do what they say they're going to do. And all of those come into the evaluation of whether somebody's telling the truth. But if you grow up in a family system where you end up in an insecure, disorganized attachment strategy, your caregivers don't respond so often or often enough uh, in what they say and what they do. And so you begin to split that part off so you don't compare it. One of the reasons the dynamics of insecure and disorganized relationships can function as long as they do without the relationships completely blowing up is because there isn't this comparison to what people say and what they do. And one of the reasons why insecure and disorganized people have such a hard time forming relationships with secure people is because secure people track it already. And so one of the things that we need to begin to do so that we can move out of a pattern of forming emotionally unsatisfying relationships is to add this fourth component of um, making sure that when you're evaluating whether somebody is telling you the truth or not, that the external presentation matches the felt sense of them, but also what they do. And then to slow down this process of engaging new people and offering them small pieces of trust to see how they do with it. One of the things about insecure and disorganized relationships is that it's lonely. And loneliness is a driver to move too fast in relationships so that you overcommit or you settle in much too fast because it quells the loneliness, it quells the abandonment terror, but then you find a little while later, a little way down the road, that actually your needs aren't being met in the way that you need them to be met. So, and if you really underlie that with the whether somebody's a reliable emotional regulator for you, we're adding into that the collaborative piece. If you've heard me talk about how to form relationships in the steps that I use, I do that as an illustration for people that didn't really learn how to do that. You slow everything down. You spend the first couple of months just really investigating whether somebody's reliably emotionally regulating. Now, this also begs the question, can you tell whether somebody's emotionally regulating for you because you can track your own emotional states well enough that you can understand whether that's happening or not? And if you can't do that, which is pretty ordinary in insecure and disorganized people, more on the avoidance side, but preoccupied people can have such a chaotic experience of their own emotions and have such poor skill at regulating them that they can't um, regulate, which then it doesn't matter whether somebody's regulating or not for you because they can't help you. Talking about the skill set of how to get out of emotionally unsatisfying relationships is really talking about looking at the skill set that you use that allows you to stay in the relationships too long. And again, one of the drivers of that is the loneliness of insecure and disorganized relationships. Sometimes we think even an emotionally unsatisfying relationship is better than being alone because the loneliness goes on for so long. So we need to conceptually understand what a secure network, a social network, a secure base to explore from really looks like. I tend to talk about it in Dunbar numbers, Dunbar parlance, an A or a B relationship, an intimate relationship where you actually tell them everything. Do you have relationships where you tell people everything? And what do we mean by everything? Over and over again, I say this. You don't have to pull the scroll of every heinous act that's ever been committed and make sure that they initial by everyone so that you can feel reassured that they won't leave you when they find out about you. Or what you could do is just give them a complete experience, a complete representation of your experience of the present moment. Uh, what happens when you want to express yourself authentically and describe the experience of the present moment so somebody really understands you? Often that creates an abandonment terror, an expression of abandonment terror. If they find out what's really happening with you, they might leave you. And you move into an inauthentic expression to regulate the abandonment terror. But what we want to do is pull down the expression of abandonment terror so it's below the level that would inhibit you from expressing what you need to express. In telling somebody authentically what your experience of the present moment is, you have immediate evidence whether they stay or not. And that staying when they see you authentically is the thing that reassures you, which it creates the experience of safety. That they won't leave you, right? That's what it does. And you stay in that anxious state if you don't do that because you're never sure whether they would leave you when they found out about it. Is that making sense? Which means you have to let yourself in on it, right? So secure people tend to have a full range of the internal expression and freedom to express it externally, and insecure and disorganized people often can't track fast enough to really understand what their authentic response is. And certainly they don't have a habit of expressing it. So that's one of the skills to learn, to regulate abandonment here well enough that you can express yourself authentically. And it really is the most mundane, ordinary experiences that need to be expressed. Christian.
George, I had a job interview this week, and I never expressed myself so authentically in a job interview. I'm
Nice.
probably not going to get the job.
Is it the authentic expression that means you won't get the job,
Uh,
or other things?
that might be part of it. Um, but I guess that kind of brings up there's an interesting question about um, well, what it means to authentically express in different contexts, and like there may be contexts where you don't always want to do that. Um,
Well, in an intimate relationship where you have an agreement with people that you express everything, you need to express everything. In a job interview, you're entering into a transactional relationship. And so what you need to be is authentic in your expression about the territory of the contractual relationship. And what is the culture there? Is there some culture of personal expression, or is there not a culture that it's hard to know in a job interview? But you will discover that when somebody tells you or asks you questions, right, about what it is. Um, so in contractual relationships, you keep up with the transaction. That's the idea. You know what the agreements are and you follow through with them. That's the purpose of that. And in intimate relationships where you have the agreement to tell everything, tell everything. But you should be reassured enough in that constellation that you're not worried that you'll be abandoned if you do. In fact, it'll be the expectation. You'll be worried that you'll be abandoned if you don't do that in those relationships. But not everybody does that, or nor do they have the experience of that. Is that what would happen in your family system? In my family system, there was a lot of information that was not exchanged between my mother and father. Then she would complain about it. She would complain about what he withheld from her, but she was also withholding from him. So, and that was the agreement. And, they were married for 50 years, something, so that it's workable. It's not that it isn't workable. But we're not talking here about transactional relationships so much as we are talking about intimate relationships. How do you make an intimate relationship work? Because we're talking about how do you come out of a habit of entering into emotionally unfulfilling relationships and then staying in them too long. And really, this is based on the agreements of intimacy. Intimacy, of course, is feeling free to express yourself authentically, not because you're risking the relationship by doing it, but because you don't worry that the person is going to abandon you because of who you are authentically, because you've always been authentic within the degrees of consent that happen, a small degree of intimacy, which leads to a request for a larger capacity, more consented intimacy, and gradually down the road, establishing over and over again that you're trustworthy with intimacy and establishing a greater breadth of the intimate exchange. So the Mudit,
the the shifting into mindset of others is very inhibiting your authenticity. So just having that mindset of not giving a F to others, it's just that view, not even going into the details, has a tendency to bring back to yourself.
um,
That's why the book is so popular, maybe that's
It's not a way that I would characterize it ever, really. I don't think, because
Uh-huh.
what you want to do is to be really good at taking care of someone else and really invested in being good at taking care of them so that they're well taken care of. And what you get out of that is somebody who's well taken care of, who's then invested in taking care of you so that you have somebody who's capable of taking care of you. Um, so, but I do get the the marketing potential of it.
I guess outside the potential of one-on-one relationship. I mean, outside where you're just meeting people, or most of the problems arise in that state where you're
Right.
just interacting
So
with people in a group.
I could also translate that into the subtle art of being authentic in all situations. And
Same
not
thing, right?
about whether you're going to be abandoned or not.
But the same thing, right? It's the same thing.
But I do think that we do need to be skillful in communicating and attentive to that rather than indifferent to it. And there's something about the title that suggests indifference to me, which is
Right.
why I'm reacting in the way I am.
I know what I mean.
Christian.
I think I might be misrepresenting the book because it's been suggested to me, but I've never read it. But I think that book is maybe a little bit more in the direction of the kind of uh, literature that's written for preoccupied people to get them to wear more of an avoidant mask in order to like
Oh,
fit into society. Um,
there is one of the things I think about the men's movements largely is it's the discomfort of preoccupied men because of the sex role assignments to preoccupation and dismissing qualities. We really do live in a culture where men are exalted in the dismissing um, mode and derogated in the preoccupied mode. And so it's a way of um, pretending, in a way, to be uh, masculine. Whereas I would probably be more inclined to think the liberation would mean that whether you're male or female, you can inhabit preoccupation. And
It's such,
that's just fine. What?
I feel it's such a paradox because the person will tell you that he or she feels good in that state of mind. It's so tricky because you're telling them to come to the authentic side, which does not feel good to them.
Right.
So it's I don't know, it's hard, tricky situation where authenticity doesn't feel good and non-authenticity feels good to them, at least temporary, not long term, but
Well, it's that's in using the Buddhist definition of delusion. You understand uh, that you feel better, which you do because it relieves the abandonment anxiety.
right.
But it undermines the relationship, which perpetuates the abandonment anxiety. It's so it isn't genuinely relieving. It's perpetuating. Um, there are many and then the women have it on the same side. Women who are dismissing are identified as too masculine, right? So not feminine. And so they have the same burden of attempting to be more feminine, um, in some ways attempting to be more preoccupied than dismissing. And then if they express fully that dismissing side, they're considered, well, lots of different things, none of them good. The thing is, in expanding the gender role so that you can be cisgendered male all the way to trans. So a cisgendered man all the way to a trans woman, or on the female side, a cisgendered woman all the way to a trans man, and have that be just fine. An ease of expression of all of that, I think would be better, so that you can just not have so much pressure on pretending to be one thing or another that doesn't necessarily match up so well, because it's going to be very hard to change all of that conditioning in a way that allows you then to be authentic and also at peace with who you are. At least that's my sense of it. I mean, the gender instruction happens from the first time they hold you up and look at your equipment. It starts right then, unless they do a DNA while you're still in utero, and then it starts before you're even born. The conditioning around that, it's very hard to undo that in a way. You get a choice, you do, but there's a lot of conditioning that comes before that choice happens. The thing that makes the anxiety go away is the sense that you can be yourself, you can express yourself authentically, and that in doing so, people will not only not abandon you, they're delighted that you're expressing. And that's the thing that lets everything settle. Now, in order to do that, you have to be able to regulate your emotional life well enough in the beginning to make these expressions. And so if you do it in small steps, then it's not so frightening. It's not so dysregulating. The danger, of course, for insecure and disorganized people is that they're lonely, and so that loneliness pushes them into over disclosing in the beginning, which then can create a kind of emotional hangover that they've said too much or they're going to be abandoned. It increases the distress rather than relieving it. And so part of this skill set is to slow yourself down and move into relationships in a way that you can control the pace of disclosure so that you're not frightened about it. And you can really get to know the other person to see whether or not they have the capacity to hold the experience of you in a way that's useful to you. Ultimately, what all of this is about is your being able to explore your life in a way that provides a deep felt sense of meaningfulness to you. And because each of our conditioning is so different, each of the pathways to exploration are different, each of the pathways to meaning are different. But what we want is this base, this social structure, this network of people who will encourage us and push us out into the exploration that we need to do. And then also who will be interested in us when we come rushing back with the latest thing that we found out. And if you don't have that, that ultimately restricts your capacity to explore. And if we could just stay home and watch TV and not care whether we explore or not, then maybe that would be the solution, except that I like to call it the creeping despair of not finding meaning comes in and destroys that peace of the social isolation, the lack of meaning. I think it's Viktor Frankl who said that people who don't find meaning in life turn toward pleasure. But pleasure is empty over time. the first bite of the cake is great, but by the time you've eaten the whole cake, you're a little sick to the stomach. Would it?
Was there any aspect of hopelessness you talked about related with this, with the despair, or is that the same thing?
Um,
That this might not happen.
oh, um, I joke about this, but I tend to be quite hopeless about most things. Um, uh, but it isn't in the way of me doing things anyway. So that would be the line that I would um, push. Some people like to have the frame as hopeful because without that hopeful frame, it's hard for them to move forward. It's hard for them to take the action. And so we're really looking at the threshold of resistant emotions interfering with you taking the actions that you need to take. If you can keep them below the threshold of interfering with you moving forward, I don't know that it necessarily matters what the quality of the feeling state is.
Because it's prior to the exploration or prior to the social.
Yeah, because it doesn't eliminate or interfere, inhibit the exploration. And hopelessness is not necessarily a terrible solution to this. As you may know, Denmark is over and over again considered the happiest country, and the reason why it's considered the happiest country is because of very low expectations. And so you'd go do something, and because the expectations are so low, you're constantly having the experience of your expectations being exceeded. Whereas if you have extremely high expectations and the experience doesn't reach them, then you're disappointed that you didn't have the peak experience that you want. Even though the experience is the same, it's just the frame in which you're holding it, right?
So the frame of hopeful versus hopeless doesn't really matter.
I don't think
As
so.
long as
Yeah, as long as it's not interfering with your capacity to act. The and I find in my own case that the hopelessness leads to my mind exploring dozens of possibilities of what could go wrong. And so when something happens, I've already got a plan, and I just go right into the plan for what happened. Whereas if there's a kind of blind hopefulness that it'll just work out, then when it doesn't, you have to have to cook up the next move. Whereas my planning mind has already engaged in that. Is any of that really centering you in the experience of the present moment, which is where we ultimately, the eternity of the present moment? That's all there is. That's all there's ever been. It's always that. Can you make a choice in that? To just anchor in that and sit there in the experience. The other thing about living long enough is that you have this the results in some sense of the race, right? You can reflect on what your childhood was like, what your adolescence was like, what your youth was like, what your adult life was like, what your old age even was like, and it's completed. So what's open now is old age for me, but you're in a different place in life. You're less patient as you get older. Maybe because there's a time pressure or a perceived time pressure. I can think, oh, if I get really old 15 years from now, but you might think, oh, if I get really old 40 years from now, it's a different frame. That makes sense. So in the beginning, when you notice, if you drag out of the background and reattach what people say with what they do, you don't go very far down the road with somebody who's doesn't match, whose actions don't match what they say, which leads you to have less dissatisfying relationships because you don't stick around in them. And then you tend to flow energy into relationships that work better away from relationships that don't work because you see from that perspective, it isn't worth it and there isn't something magical that you can do. I remember my grandmother telling me, I think I was 15 or something. She said, when you're thinking about committing to somebody, you want to meet their family because you want to make sure that they're coming from a good family because you can love them, but loving them won't change the dynamics of the family that they grew up in, and you're going to end up having to live with that. And so that was sort of the 19th and 20th century version of how to take a look at this. Make sure that they come from a good family because you can't change this too much. And that really is, I think, largely true still because the conditioning is so dense, it's very hard to change it into something else. Is that making sense? And so if you go slow and you examine the experiences that you have over and over again, you can examine what the person is capable of so that you can see that if the needs that you have are within their capacity and they also can find that out about you in a collaborative relation. In a collaborative relationship, of course, you take care of them. You have to be capable of taking care of them in the way that they need. You have to be able to do it. And you have to be willing to do it and want to do it and enjoy it enough that you do enough of it. And if you don't have those qualities in the experience of taking care of them, you won't do it, or you'll want them to let you take care of them in a way that may not be so important to them. And they will feel not very well taken care of. It's very typical for people to, rather than inquire how somebody wants to be taken care of, to take care of them in the way that you enjoy being taken care of. But it's so unique, that process. Can you get somebody to tell you how they want to be taken care of? Or can you collaborate and figure out how you can take care of somebody else in such a way that they enjoy it, that it matters to them? And then will they reciprocate and take care of you in the way that you need? And you would need to tell them how to do that, or the two of you would have to figure it out together in the way, in a way that you find the care meaningful. And this is an exchange, of course, an exchange of information, an exchange of care, both giving and receiving on each side. With the expectation that they'll do it, right? Do you have that expectation? One of the reasons we stay in emotionally depriving relationships is we don't really have a belief that there are other kinds of relationships or that anybody would take care of us. So we stick around because often the sense of being in a relationship, even if it's depriving, is better than being completely alone. Is that all making sense? So learning to regulate your own emotions, learning really how to give and accept consent, how to withhold consent when you don't want to, how not to violate consent when somebody else doesn't want to. For organized people, this is a little bit easier than disorganized people because they don't really have much experience of consent in the way that their family systems or the way that people are related to them. And so they're easily violating of other people's consent and not really expecting anybody to respond to their expressions of consent. Go slow, see if somebody's regulating. If they are regulating, go into this period of discovering how to take care of them. And do you want to do it? Do you enjoy doing it? Do you do enough of it so they feel taken care of? And do they reciprocate for you so that you also feel well taken care of? And then get on to whether it makes sense for you to relate, to travel together. I like to call it traveling companions, that your primary exploration is close enough to their primary exploration that there's a synergy. That is to say, what they find out for their exploration and express to you is important because it helps you with what you can explore, what you can discover, and the stuff that you find and express to them is also useful to them so that they can find out. They can further their own exploration based on what you discovered. So each of you don't have to do it all. You can do parts of it, and that carries you forward. So what do you say we do some meditation practice? What should you rather do? Heart or Vipassana or insight? Well, let's do some easy peasy concentration and insight practice. So go ahead and take your meditation posture. All right, let go of the meditation. How's that? So nothing's going on this Saturday. We just finished our level 1 last week, and so we're taking a break. And then the following Saturday, we're going to begin a level 1, but for people in the who are professional helpers. We're going to talk about attachment repair and the Mettagroup method, but we're going to include some of the discussions that might be relevant to helping professionals. So in some sense, pulling the curtain back on that and go through level 1. We'll do a level 2 actually for helping professionals starting in April, Friday mornings. So take a look at that. A few other things on the website. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that if you're able to make a donation, you will. There's a link on the website to make donations. Really appreciate your practice. Good to see you. I hope to see you soon on the path somewhere. Good night.